Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. We are excited to have Kevin O'Connell with us, who is the Chief Defender of the Delaware Office of Defensive Services. He's going to talk with us about some of the history of the Office of Defensive Services and sort of where things are going. So we're very excited to have him with us, and I will let Kevin introduce himself and get us launched.
Good evening. Thanks, Lynn. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak to the folks at Westminster about indigent defense and our office and a host of other things that maybe we'll go into. I'm going to explain the little mark on my head. I was away in Maine for a week. It was great. I came back. I hurriedly tried to cut the lawn. Saturday night, you may recall, we got a big thunderstorm. So I was hurrying to cut the lawn and I had to move something from out of a lilac bush. I stuck my head into that lilac bush and my wife had pruned it and a branch took me right in the forehead. So that's why I look like this now. I look like I just came from Ash Wednesday Mass, but anyway, it looks worse than it felt, but it was more embarrassing than anything else. Anyway, I'm Kevin O'Connell. When I say a lifelong resident of Wilmington, Delaware, I've been here since 1964. My dad worked for DuPont, so we lived in Cleveland, Houston. My brother and sister, who were older than me, lived in Philadelphia and St. Louis. So we moved around like a lot of people who worked for DuPont did back in the day. But we settled here in Wilmington, and I've been here since then. I went to Falk Road Elementary right across from Brandywine High School, and then Hamby Junior High School, and then Concord High School, and then off to Vanderbilt University, and then back home to Delaware Law School. I was in private practice for about 5 years with a civil litigation firm. I did not find it fulfilling at all. So my wife surprisingly talked me into doing what I really wanted to do, which was open up my own office, where I specialized in defending people accused of crime. I did that for 16, 17 years. And then in 2005, I came to the Public Defender's Office, now known as the Office of Defense Services. And I've been here since. On June 1st of 2021, Governor Carney appointed me the Chief Defender. And I've been in that job since. While I was in private practice, I did work for what is called the Office of Conflict Counsel. It was just conflict attorneys back then. And it's essentially people, not everybody in a criminal case can be represented by the Public Defender's Office, even if you qualify for their services, for a number of reasons. There might be two defendants in the case, or maybe the Public Defender's Office represents a witness in the case. But for some reason, there's a conflict. So a private attorney like myself would be appointed. And I did that for many, many, many years. And then I came to the Office of Defense Services. So that's where I'm at. I was a trial lawyer for the most part in what I did here. And I never worked in policy or management. And so this has been a real baptism for me over the last 2 years. The analogy I use is that I was down in the engine room shoveling coal for many years, and then they brought me up on the bridge and said, "Here's the wheel," and I didn't know what I was doing. But the lucky part is that there was a great management team that stayed on after my predecessor left, and they give me the illusion that I'm running the office, and they make all the tough decisions. I've learned how with emails to wait a little bit. Type in agreed and hit reply all, and that usually works in terms of a lot of the decisions that I have to make. So tonight, when Lynn invited me, I thought it would be a great opportunity to tell you, maybe just from an informative perspective, the history of indigent defense, both nationally and in Delaware, and then tie that into what indigent defense has evolved into in Delaware from its roots in the early 60s. And then open it up to discussion about any questions you may have about what our office does or anything. So I'll leave it at that. So now the tough part. There we go. And there we are. So the history of indigent defense and why it is so important to a safe and healthy Delaware is what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. I think, what do I do next? Do I click and it moves to the next thing? If I just left click, is it going to do that? Yes, it is. So we've learned two things. So when anybody thinks about indigent defense, you generally think of Clarence Earl Gideon, Gideon versus Wainwright, the famous Supreme Court case from 1963. And most people, if asked, they would say that's the roots of indigent defense. These 9 old white guys gave us indigent defense. They came up with the idea, and we are their benefactors. And in some part, that is true, but it's certainly not the whole truth. They made it a constitutional mandate, but other people thought of the idea well before them. And as is the truth with many things in the United States, behind many great movements are great women. And one such woman is Clara Shortridge Foltz. She's a remarkable person. At the age of 15 in the 1860s, she eloped with a handsome Union soldier, and she was from the Midwest. And she and her new husband headed out to the West Coast and settled in San Jose, California. She then bore him 5 children, and he promptly left her. And so she was left mother of 5, needing to make a living, and she went to work for a law office. And then she had the desire to become a lawyer herself. The problem with that for Clara was that the law, which created lawyers in California or authorized them to be, said that only, and you guessed it, a white man could be a lawyer in California at that time, as was the case in many states. So untrained in the law, she actually drafted a new statute. She took it before the California General Assembly. They passed it, and they changed the words white man or white male to citizen of California. So it did not limit it to women. It did not limit it to white people. Well, the governor was not going to sign that law, and Clara was not deterred. She went straight to his office, sat outside his office until he let her in, and she promptly pulled, as legend has it, the bill out of his outbox, put it in front of him, and said, "I'm not leaving until you put your signature on that." And he did. He relented. Clara then started a number of firsts. She was the first woman lawyer west of the Mississippi. She was the first deputy district attorney for the county of Los Angeles, where she racked up quite a career as a prosecutor, and was the first of her type out there. But what she saw and what she learned from that experience is that the power of the state to bring to bear law enforcement and prosecution against average citizens who are unrepresented is incredibly unfair. And so she began hatching the idea of a publicly paid for defense attorney, so that you would not only have publicly paid for police and publicly paid for prosecutors, but publicly paid for defense attorneys to bring free justice to our society. She hatched the idea. Finally, her national coming out was at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, where she gave a barn burner of a speech, and the idea started to catch fire. But as is the case in the United States, great ideas don't become law very quickly. And it took her 21 years before she actually opened the first public defender office, and that was in Los Angeles County in 1914. And then Alameda County, California followed with its own office, and then Chicago, and then several states out west, 30 actually, started some form of indigent defense at the state level. But still, there wasn't a constitutional right to it, so not every state provided indigent defense. Enter Clarence Earl Gideon. Some of you may have seen the Hallmark Hall of Fame made-for-TV movie starring Henry Fonda as Clarence Earl Gideon in Gideon's Trumpet, or read the book by Anthony Lewis, Gideon's Trumpet. But it is the story of a man who, in the summer of 1962, is arrested and charged with the burglary of the Bay Harbor Pool Hall in Panama City, Florida. He's charged with stealing some Coca-Colas, some beer, some cigarettes, and some change from some vending machines. He gets to trial and he asks of the trial judge, "I would like the appointment of counsel because I can't afford one of my own." And the trial judge said no. And so, not surprisingly, Clarence Earl Gideon, representing himself, was convicted of the burglary of the Bay Harbor Pool Hall and the theft, and was sentenced to 5 years in jail. Undeterred by this, Clarence Gideon began representing himself on appeal, lost at the Florida level, but then wrote a handwritten cert petition to the United States Supreme Court, which was granted. He was appointed counsel then in the person of a gentleman by the name of Abe Fortas, one of the great litigators in our country at the time, who would later himself become a Supreme Court justice. And Abe Fortas argued his case before the United States Supreme Court and won in a 9-0 decision authored by Justice Hugo Black. The right of counsel of one charged with crime, the right of one charged with crime to counsel may not be deemed fundamental and essential to fair trials in some countries, but it is in ours. And so they held that the Sixth Amendment required the appointment of counsel. The epilogue to Clarence's story is that Abe Fortas, who was not a trial lawyer, came to Clarence and said, "Look, I know a lot of really good criminal lawyers, really powerful men from Miami who have associated themselves on occasion with the ACLU, and I can get them to represent you for free at trial." And Gideon said, "Thank you, but no thank you. I just want somebody appointed to represent me from Panama City." And so he went before the trial judge there, asked for the appointment of counsel, which this time was granted, and a local practitioner by the name of Fred Turner, came to bat for Gideon on a pro bono basis, represented him at trial, and he was found not guilty. Gideon spent 2 years in jail waiting for that date to happen for a crime that he did not commit. But we owe a debt of gratitude to his stick-to-itiveness and to the Supreme Court. So that's a little history of nationally of indigent defense. Immediately after the Gideon decision, the Delaware General Assembly went about creating its own public defender's office. And that was done on July 1, 1964. Then Governor Elbert N. Carvel, whom the very building I'm sitting in is named after, appointed a gentleman by the name of James Kelleher to be the first public defender. The joke about among all my colleagues is you need not be Irish to apply for the job, but you have to be Irish to get the job, because the 4 public defenders we've had over the last 60 years are James Kelleher, Larry Sullivan, Brendan O'Neill, and Kevin O'Connell. So it does seem to be an Irishman's job. The first budget for that office was $100,000, which was a lot back in 1964. And Kelleher had 3 assistants. One of them was not Joe Biden. He came along a little bit later. And that office handled 875 cases in the first year. In 2015, 50 years later, the office became, and I'll explain the significance of that, became the Office of Defense Services. And we're now a state agency that has a budget in excess now of $31 million, employs over 200 public servants, including 85 lawyers. Our office handled more than 20,000 legal matters last year, and we represent 85%, at least 85% of the justice-involved people in the state of Delaware. So I always love to ask people this question: what is your image of a public defender? And a lot of people will laugh and they'll say, like the guy in My Cousin Vinny gives the stuttering opening statement and then doesn't get to proceed. He's just, an incompetent boob. But unfortunately, most of society sees the public defender as an incompetent attorney whose role is that of a bureaucratic functionary who cooperates with the state to fulfill the ritual of the adversarial system without seriously challenging the state's goals. That is the image that I confront in court, or at least when I was a courtroom lawyer, almost every day, in cocktail parties, in my church, and unfortunately, when I go over to the prison and meet with my new clients, that is how I am viewed quite often. But that is not that is not the group of lawyers that I'm associated with here at the Office of Defense Services now. We are anything but that. In 1964, people handled cases back then. The difference now is we represent clients. And so what you'll see there is our mission, zealous advocacy for the people, and our vision, protecting fundamental rights, liberty, and dignity of clients entrusted to us through collaborative defense. At the top there, you'll see how the Office of Defense Services is made up. It used to just be called the Public Defender's Office, but now we have the Office of Conflicts Counsel, which I briefly described for you before. It's our conflict lawyers. They're private lawyers that are handled by an executive director of our Office of Conflicts Counsel, and by each county has its own head of conflicts counsel. And then we have central administration, which I'm a part of. So when a case comes in, somebody's over at the prison, for instance, one of our intake investigators will meet with that person. They'll do an intake interview and they'll determine whether or not they are going to be a public defender client or an Office of Conflicts Counsel client based on what they learn from the case. And then they'll refer the file to whomever is going to handle the case for them. So you see all the various things that we do in our office. We have trial, appellate, special litigation attorneys, non-legal, legal and non-legal support staff, client advocates. I'll talk to you about what they are in a few minutes. Forensic social mitigation specialists. We have a community engagement specialist. We have a client intake that I just described for you. We have investigators, and we now have a post-disposition unit. But it is all at the center of this wheel is the client. And the client is the most important thing that we represent, people. So what we are and where what we do and where we do it is we have offices in Sussex, Kent, and Newcastle counties. We represent people in the family court, Court of Common Pleas, the Superior Court, and the Supreme Court on appeal. We have a post-disposition unit. Post-disposition is something we just started over the last couple of years. We hired a young lady by the name of Eliza Hurst. Eliza is a phenomenal human being and a great lawyer. And she represents people primarily who are seeking expungements of their criminal record. And over the last 2 years, she has expunged probably the record of close to 1,000 people. Most of them formerly juvenile adjudicated, but a lot of them adults. And what does that mean to expunge your record? It means that while the courts won't forget that you may have had a criminal conviction in your past, the rest of the public never knows about it in terms of people you're applying for a job or housing or things like that. Now, I'm not saying a person who's been convicted of murder can get that expunged, but a lot of low-level crimes like, shoplifting or, some employee theft or criminal mischief or things like that, youthful indiscretions, as we'll call them, can be expunged from your record. A lot of times this is preventing people from getting jobs. A lot of times this is preventing people from getting housing or education, or just being seen by the people who know them as something more than the worst thing they ever did. This gives them a second chance. And we have second chance clinics going on up and down the state of Delaware throughout the year. We do probably one every 2 months, and we've been able to help a lot of people. Our special litigation unit is the part of our office that is the one part of our office that doesn't represent clients. It represents ideas. And so let's say we're having a problem. We're identifying the fact that, Wilmington police are, stopping our clients regularly without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. And we're seeing this as a pattern. So our special litigation unit will help our lawyers draft motions that will pull in information from other cases to better litigate these issues, that are broader than simply the one case. Our community engagement unit is a unit of one really right now. Some of you who may have been involved in the ACLU Smart Justice campaign may be familiar with a gentleman by the name of Hanif Salam. He is our community engagement specialist here. We poached him from the ACLU. He's a terrific, fine person. He's a community organizer, and he is getting us out from behind our desks, out from the courtrooms, and out into the community, where we are not just having these expungement clinics that I've described, but we're also having listening sessions at the Hicks Anderson Center, and things like that. We're even going to go over to the prison and have a listening session there. So we are out in the community talking to the people that we represent. So the goals of ODS, if you look on our website, are holistic and collaborative defense. I'll talk about what holistic means in the context of indigent defense. We want to transform the justice system. We want to represent and promote justice, fairness, and dignified treatment of our clients, but not just our clients. We want to have an office where we respect and understand and support our colleagues. One of the greatest things about this place, and you can't lay it at the feet of Kevin O'Connell, I'm a part of it, but we're all a part of it, is ODS is truly a family. A lot of offices say that, but for the last 12 years, we've been the top workplace, or one of the top workplaces in the Delaware Today magazine's analysis of what a great place to work is. We are a great place to work. We have a tremendous supportive environment here. More of our goals include greater community engagement, reform through legislative advocacy and policy initiatives. And we are very keyed in on diversity, equity, inclusion, not just in our workforce, but in the courts, in the community, and in every aspect of society that we touch. So holistic defense, I've thrown that term around a couple of times. What is it at ODS? I could go down this list and, kind of like explain everything that we do involving in holistic defense, but the better way to do it is to tell you a story. But what we came to understand maybe 10 years ago was that you can't just represent a file, because a person who comes to our office with a criminal justice problem, it's not just that criminal justice problem that they have. There's probably a myriad of issues that have led them to be justice involved. And not just that, after they've become justice involved, there are going to be a myriad of issues afterwards. So we have begun helping people, who come to our office by identifying the issues going on in their lives before they came to us, and fashioning some ways to help them after they leave our doors. We have come to understand that of all the social service agencies in Delaware and in our federal government, we are best situated to help people at a difficult time in their life. They have our trust. We have that relationship with them that we can identify the issues that have caused them to become justice involved, and we can try to find ways to make sure that they're not in justice involved in the future and set them up for success in the future. But as I said, let me just tell you a story. And this is a true story. I'm going to use a different name for the gentleman for his anonymity purposes. But we have a thing called vertical representation here at our office. And what it means is when I get the first place we meet people is usually at what's called their preliminary hearing, at least the felony level people. Preliminary hearings happen in the Court of Common Pleas, and it's just really a probable cause hearing to determine whether or not the case is going to move on to the Superior Court. I'll usually get the file several days before that hearing, and I'll have an opportunity either to go out to the prison and meet the person or have a video with them. So we'll call this client of mine Tom. The rest of this is true. Tom, I came to find out, became justice involved. He was a veteran of who had proudly served his country in Vietnam, but because of the trauma that he had experienced, he'd become justice involved up in Philadelphia, and he'd had some run-ins with the law, usually as a result of the mental health issues that he was experiencing as a result of the trauma that he had experienced. Well, it seems that Tom who was living in some apartments in Newport, had his medications, he hadn't stopped using them, but they weren't doing the job that they normally did. And he had gone down to the office, the maintenance office. And this was shortly after, you may recall, the shooting that had occurred in Las Vegas, where the guy was up in the hotel room and he killed a lot of people that were at a country music concert. Right after that, he went down to that office and said, "Hey, we might have another Las Vegas here if you're not careful." And he made a remark like that, thank goodness the person took it seriously, called the county police. They came out, confronted him, took him into custody because they thought he might be thinking of doing some harm to himself or to other people. And he was put in, he couldn't make bail, and he was over at Gander Hill Prison. And he had felony charges pending for terroristic threatening and some other charges. So I found out that he had been justice involved up in Philadelphia. I reached out to the public defender up there, and she was tremendous. She said, "Yeah, he made it through Veterans Court here. He's a terrific person when he's on his meds, when he's doing what he's supposed to do. Really, he's somebody you really need to go the extra mile for, because he's not a bad person at all." Luckily, I reached out to the Department of Justice, and the lawyer who was handling what is called felony screening had some experience with people like Tom, and he investigated the background, and he worked out a non-criminal disposition of Tom's case, such that he was going to dismiss the charges on the condition that Tom not return to those apartments, and also that Tom reconnect with the Veterans Administration people that had, that were handling his mental health treatment. So normally I would have walked into court that Monday with Tom's case, stepped up to the podium, told the judge, the state's dismissing the charges, and I would have dusted my hands off, walked out of that courtroom, patted myself on the back for what a great job I'd done, and gotten on with my next case. The reality is there's a reason Tom became justice involved, and I wasn't addressing it. And there were lots of problems that were going to flow from the fact that Tom was now justice involved. One was he was about to get released from Gander Hill Prison, and he had no place to live. So in 2018, we became a pilot program for a thing called Partners for Justice. Partners for Justice is not unlike AmeriCorps or Teach for America, in that it takes recently graduated college students who want to commit to 2 years of working with a public defender's office, and they help with those things that I don't have time to address: housing, medical and mental health and substance abuse treatment, food, clothing, employment, maybe just helping somebody get an ID, connect them to their Medicaid benefits or their veterans benefits, get them, a driver's license, what have you. They are young people that are assisting me in all that I have to do for people like Tom. So I called up our PFJs, our advocates, and I said, "Hey, I've got this guy. He's going to be released. I don't know what to do. Can you help me out?" And the PFJ that was helping me reached out. She found a local, actually it was right here on Walnut Street, right outside my window, veterans housing place. She connected with the executive director there, and he said, "Yeah, we have a bed for him. And yeah, I'll go over to Gander Hill with you tomorrow and pick him up and bring him here. And he can stay here until he secures more permanent housing." But she didn't stop there. She knew that he had belongings back at his prior residence, and he was going to need to fetch them in some way, but he had a no contact order. So she was able to arrange for one of those two guys in a truck and for the county police to go out there with him and to get his belongings and have them transported to his new housing at the veterans housing. But she didn't stop there. She knew that one of the problems that he was going to have when he was released is he wasn't going to have any of his medications. So she reached out to the reentry folks and to the medical people at Gander Hill and made sure that he got bridge medication to get him to his next appointment at the Veterans Administration. And then she set him up with some other social service things to help him out in a lot of other ways. And I can tell you that Tom hasn't been back, and that was several years ago. And I think it's in large part because of all of the things that our advocate did with Tom. That is holistic defense. That's what it looks like. And it didn't just happen in Tom's case. It's happening every day here at the Office of Defense Services. So these are some of my colleagues and some quotes that they've given me for this PowerPoint. I didn't just cherry pick these people. These are just some of the people. James Turner is one of our Superior Court lawyers. He's a phenomenal lawyer. Alex Schaefer, again, works in our Superior Court. Paige Chapman, in addition to being one of our youth defenders, working with my daughter, who's head of the Youth Defense Unit, is head of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And Frances Ratner is a phenomenal lawyer in the Court of Common Pleas. Jamie Walker, she works in the Superior Court out of our Kent County office. But they all love working here and the things that they're doing with this office. What does the future of holistic defense look like? Well, there are lots of areas that we're moving into. Parental representation, what does that mean? Sometimes parents are charged with abuse and neglect of the kids living in their home, their children. And they're entitled to representation in those proceedings. But they were oftentimes just appointed private lawyers who didn't know what they were doing, didn't have this sort of the infrastructure in their offices to sort of figure out what's going on, what's wrong in these people's lives. And it just wasn't working out well. So the court approached us and the Community Legal Aid Society. And between our two offices, we're going to begin representing parents in these proceedings. What is the benefit of that? Well, it's huge. One is we're going to be reuniting families sooner because we have the infrastructure of forensic social specialists, partners for justice advocates, lawyers, education people, investigators who can help these people try to figure out what's going wrong in their life that got DFS involved, the Department of Family Services involved in their life. And the goal is to reunite families. That is, correct the problems, get families back together. That's just right for us, for the citizens of Delaware, but also it's a huge money saver. Foster care is incredibly expensive to the state of Delaware, whether it's temporary or long-term. It's something that we all pay for. And if we can reunite families in a whole holistic way, then that's a good thing. Civil asset forfeiture means if one of my clients gets pulled over and they have a lot of cash on them, oftentimes they forfeit that cash, or even the car that they're driving, simply because they have a drug charge or some other type of charge involving felonies. Oftentimes it has nothing to do, the money that they have or the assets that they have, nothing to do with the criminal charges. But we have never represented them in those asset forfeiture proceedings. So oftentimes they give up hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars that come from their paychecks, their car, their mother's car. Now we're going to be involved in those proceedings because it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to get into participatory defense hubs because it's just a very involved discussion, but they are community-based organizations that teach people about the systems that they're involved in when they become justice involved, because that is the greatest fear people have when they come to our office. They have no idea what goes on in the courts. So these are organizations that we will partner with to talk to families, to talk to people who are justice involved, whether they're at the prison or out in the community, to let them know what their rights are and what the systems look like. We are already involved in education and truancy representation. We got a grant, and now we have got a full-time truancy lawyer, because what we have found is education is the key with young people. If people are not getting the individualized education plan that they're entitled to, or if they're being truant, there's usually reasons for that. And if we can get them back connected with getting an education, oftentimes they will not become our clients later. The next front that I'm hoping to get us involved in is a lot more is pardons and commutations. There are a lot of people in our prison system that we can't get out because they can't get representation. They're old people. There are people who were sentenced to long terms in prison decades ago. They have health issues. They have paid their debts to society. They just need a lawyer to navigate them through the very complex pardon and commutation system. And finally, we associate ourselves with private immigration legal assistance, but we need to bring it into our office because we have so many clients whose immigration rights are implicated by becoming justice involved. Our policy goals for the future, Lynn Keelhorn has been so involved in that first one, law enforcement reform. We want to see greater transparency and accountability in our society. The Leobor Law, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, now known as PODPAT, the Police Officers Due Process and Transparency Law, still don't provide for great transparency and accountability on the part of our law enforcement. We are fighting for that in the General Assembly. Similarly, probation reform. When I first started practicing law in the mid-'80s, actually the early '80s, probation officers wore khakis and had blazers on with patches on the shoulders, and they were, for the most part, social workers. Now, the people who come in from the office, from probation officer, are wearing almost military uniforms. They're wearing uniforms where they tuck their pants into their boots. They have a gun. They're law enforcement officers. And I, along with other people, are trying to move us back in the other direction, where we help people who've become justice involved transition back into the community without looking for a way to lock them up again and again and again. SENTAC reform refers to our Sentencing Accountability Commission. What we would like to see is a change in that commission to make it leaner, faster, and more able to change our sentencing laws such that we could have guidelines for sentencing that were enforceable. And if the judges who are, supposed to be sentencing people sentence outside those guidelines, well, then maybe we can appeal those sentences to the Delaware Supreme Court. We don't really have that power right now. The next one is an incredibly important one to me. It has become my personal crusade. Public defenders on the bench. That is hugely important. If you want to get me really torqued up, buy me a cup of coffee and talk to me about this. But you get on any bench in Delaware, family court, justice of the peace, court of common pleas, superior court, Supreme Court, you can't swing a cat without hitting 2 or 3 white male former prosecutors. The people who are on our bench, and there's nothing wrong with being a prosecutor, but everybody who's on the bench shouldn't be a former white male prosecutor. Maybe we should get some public defenders and put them on the bench. It would bring a different perspective to the bench, a different balance to the bench. Diversity on the bench is incredibly important, not just in terms of the color of a person's skin or their background, but their professional background. And for too many years, public defenders have been scoffed at. I mean, if you watch the confirmation hearings of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, you saw Lindsey Graham grill her about representing people at Guantanamo, grill her about representing people who had been charged with some very bad crimes in her time that she served as a federal public defender, and vilify her in the speeches that he made about why she should not become a justice of the Supreme Court. Well, thank God she is a member of the Supreme Court now, but we need to see more public defenders on the bench, and we need to change the narrative that people like Senator Graham, and a lot of his colleagues had about what it means to be a public defender. The next one, incredibly important to me. There's a lot of great people who want to come work for us, but they can't because they graduate from law school and they have literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And if you want to come work at our office, you'll start in the mid $60,000. That sounds like a lot of money to some people, but if you went into private practice, you'd be making 2 and 3 times that amount. And so people who want to go into public service just can't. If they want to buy a house, if they want to pay off their student loan debt, if they want to, live a life where you're not living on a subsistence. And we want to find more ways to increase the salaries of the people entering into public service and to find ways to encourage greater loan forgiveness. If you stay in public service, we'll forgive your loans. So we've gotten some little fits and starts at the state level and at the federal level, but we need to get further in that. Ending the death penalty, if anybody knows me, has been a personal crusade of mine since the late 80s. We don't have a death penalty in Delaware right now. Well, actually, we really do have a death penalty in Delaware right now, but it is unconstitutional. What I would like to see happen is let's pass a constitutional amendment that says we will never have it again, because we are always just one bad crime away from bringing back the death penalty. And the last one is a sort of wonky thing. we don't have access to data about what's going on in our criminal justice system. And if you really want to know what's going on, you need to be able to bury yourself in that data. And instead, we're burying our heads in the sand because we don't have usable data here in Delaware. So in case we needed something to talk about, I added that question since I'm speaking to a church group. How does indigent defense square with my Christian values? So I'm going to put that to you. I mean, that's something that, you can ask me whatever question you want, but I'll tell you that the question that myself and most of my colleagues have to answer at cocktail parties, at dinner parties, at our own kitchen tables is, how can you represent those people, those horrible people who've done horrible things? How can you represent them? And each of us has a different answer for that question. If we had more than 15 minutes left, I would tell you a story of my first death penalty client, a fellow by the name of Andre Deputy, and the education I received from representing him, but we don't have time for that. But what I will say is that in my own sense, I refer usually to the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, where after being baptized by John the Baptist, after spending 40 days in the desert, he comes back to Nazareth. He goes into the synagogue, and he's handed the scroll from Isaiah. He finds the most familiar passage to him and reads it. And so he reads from Isaiah that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then he rolled up the scroll and he said to the congregation, today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. I think that the unwritten part of that, that the next thing he said was, I'm going to work for the office of public defender. Because I think that if Jesus had been a lawyer, he would have been a public defender. And that doesn't mean that I see myself in messianic ways. My daughters would say, yeah, you have a very God image of yourself sometimes, Dad. But I really believe that of all the people in our justice system, civil and criminal, who are fulfilling this charge that I think Jesus says, not just about himself, but all of us, that we are the ones who are doing this. We are the ones who are working with the marginalized. We are the ones who are looking to bring justice to the poor and the oppressed and to free those who are captive. So thank you for having me. And I'll open it up to you, for any questions you have or just comments you want to make, whatever.
And Kevin, if you can stop sharing your screen now, that way we'll be able to see you and everyone else.
Gotcha.
There we go. I'll start by just saying,
I can talk a lot.
Wow, and thank you. That was such a great presentation. I am so glad to know we have 200 people in Delaware all working to do what you just described to us. That is just amazing. But I see Marge has her hand up. So Marge.
Thank you, Kevin. That was so interesting. I'm wondering who can access I'm going to say Public Defender's Office, but I know it has a different name. What's the name of your office?
The Office of Defense Services.
Okay, so who is eligible to access your services?
So if you go on our website, you can find there are links, that will show you how to get our services, whether it's, if you're over in the prison, you automatically get our services. But if you've been charged with a crime and you made bail, well, then you have to come to us and ask us for those services, unless you're a juvenile. We represent all juveniles, regardless of the situation they're in. But if you're an adult and you're charged with a crime and you're released on bail, whether you do it online or whether you do it over the phone or whether you come to the courthouse, you have to interview with us and have one of our intake people talk to you. And we have some restrictions regarding, financial wherewithal. And this was started, 40, 50 years ago. We came up with this number. If you net $500 a week or less, you qualify for our services. And then it's based on, like, if you have multiple people in your household, it changes, things like that. We rarely turn anyone away, is the bottom line, for financial reasons. If you're wealthy and you come to us, we might argue with you that you need to hire your own lawyer. But we, ultimately it was an ODS lawyer that represented Tom Capano on appeal. We do represent the full gamut. If you just turn me loose, I'm just going to start talking again. So come up with some questions.
Well, I have a question just because I'm so impressed that Delaware has started, funding positions that are more than just the attorneys that represent folks in courts, but recognize the bigger issues that surround them and all the other help that they need. What did it take to convince them? And do you think it's because they actually recognize how much money it's saving the state in the long run in terms of preventing more people from becoming justice involved in things? What do you think drove them to agree that that makes sense?
It's a lot of things, but I stand on the shoulders of the people who came before me, Larry Sullivan and Brendan O'Neill particularly. But Larry really was a savvy politician. A lot of people know Larry, but he was a savvy politician, and he had relationships on both sides of the aisle. And he was probably the first one to communicate the notion, whether you're Republican or Democrat, parity is important. In other words, if you're giving these resources to law enforcement and the Department of Justice, you should be giving these resources to the people who are defending the people on the other side. And there's that sense of fairness that he communicated to people in the General Assembly, and it has carried on since then. Gradually, we have been able to convince people through the results that we get that the social service part of what we do, whether it's forensic social specialists, these are people who work in our office. They used to be called psychoforensic evaluators, but we call them forensic social specialists now. People who will look into your mental health history, your substance abuse history, your social history, and try to find out if there are reasons why those histories maybe led you to the justice system, and how we might get you steered on the right track, whether it's counseling or treatment or what have you. And we showed that this produced results. And so we've been lucky. When I go to the Joint Finance Committee now of the Delaware General Assembly, I get a pretty good treatment by people on both sides of the aisle. They have come to recognize that indigent defense is important and what we do is important. So we're very lucky. And I go to conferences involving public defenders and chief defenders from lots of other states and counties across America, and they are not as lucky as I am. I mean, there are places that are better funded, that are better resourced than we are, but there are a lot of places that are not. I met a young lady, I can talk on and on and on. I met a young lady at a leadership conference in Columbia, Missouri, who came from Texas. And this young lady was in her mid-30s, and she and 3 other colleagues constituted their indigent defense services for 3 counties along the Texas border with Mexico, along the Rio Grande. The geographic area that she represented was larger than the state of Delaware, okay? And it was her and 3 other lawyers doing everything from juvenile shoplifting all the way to murder, except for capital murder. That was the only thing she didn't do. And she was doing all of the indigent defense. And I said, so what do you do every day? And she said, I'm in my car with a headset on, trying to figure out from my secretary where I'm supposed to be next. And she's driving and appearing in courts. I mean, that's just wrong, but it's also amazing. So we're blessed here in Delaware.
Lucy, is that a hand up? You're still muted. Let me see, I can ask you to unmute if that makes it easier.
And I was interested in the involvement in truancy in the city. And how far are you developed, your department developed on attending to those incidents?
So I wish my daughter was here. She's head of our youth unit, and actually so what we got was a grant first, and then we have a lawyer, and her name's escaping me, who is our truancy lawyer in our family court unit. And that's all she does, is she represents people who are involved in the truancy system, which is largely in the magistrate courts. But she doesn't just represent them in the sense of like going to court with them. She is working with education lawyers in the private sector, because oftentimes our public system of education is not providing the resources that they're supposed to under federal law. They're not giving the individualized education plans that a lot of the people who end up in our truancy system are involved in. Or maybe it's related to parents who aren't paying attention to what's going on. She can get them the services they need, but we're not doing enough and we need to do more. But it comes with building a track record. And so we just started doing the truancy court stuff, and we'll start, doing more hopefully in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Sally?
So,
I just want to say how impressive your presentation has been, and it fills me with some hope for justice in this world. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Sally. I really appreciate that. I am enthusiastic, if nothing else, about what I do and the importance of what we do here. So we don't always do it perfect, but we really try hard, and I work with some incredible people, and so I'm very, very lucky to be in the office that I'm in.
Bill?
I was wondering how often the pardon board, if that's the right term, how often the pardon board meets. We have several of us have an associate that's in the expungement process and has worked, as I understand it, has worked his way through the expungement process to the point where he needs to be interviewed by the pardon board. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We are kind of frustrated. We are frustrated, not kind of frustrated, but we are frustrated by the fact that our associate has really turned his life around, found a skill that he was interested in learning. He went to the Delaware Skills Center. He got a certificate, and all that 3 or 4 months that took, he was marching through expungement, and he's now sitting awaiting his time before the pardon board, as I understand it. And so he's gone back to work where he was working 6 months ago before he decided to go to the Delaware Skills Center. And I'm just wondering if there's anyone that might be able to help him expedite that process, because he has a lot of applications out there, and I have a feeling that he's up against that first question by future employers. Do you have a criminal record? And he has a criminal record, and I don't know what it is, but it must be a serious one if it has to go before the pardon board. And so he's kind of back where he began before he made these very important decisions for his life. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
So, Bill, the problem you're describing is a common one, unfortunately, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your associate had a serious conviction. One of the things we're trying to change is, and you just do it steps at a time, little increments at a time through the General Assembly, is part of the problem is that if you have multiple convictions for small offenses, they'll oftentimes make you go to the pardon board before you can get an expungement of your criminal record. So we're trying to short circuit that process where you can do both at once, or not have to get a pardon at all. So what I would say is if you could connect your friend, he or she can do it by going on the website for the Office of Defense Services and look just for Post Disposition Unit Eliza Hurst. She will talk to him tomorrow about and help him navigate the system that he's in right now. We work in conjunction with the Department of Labor. There's a quasi-public organization called Apex, and they handle pardons because we can't do that right now. We don't have the resources to do it right now. So we work with, at our second chance clinics, we work with Apex to try to connect people to the resources they need. But
he's been through the Apex system. He started there and he's proceeded through that.
All right. So at least Eliza might be able to explain to him, if you're frustrated, here's the hoops you have to still jump through.
Okay.
So I would encourage him to get in touch with Eliza Hurst at our post disposition unit here at and I was trying, while we were talking, I was trying to find a way to get into, and I can't do anything because I'm not tech savvy. I can't get out of the Zoom and look up her number. Otherwise I'd say it. But it's right on, Office of Defense Services of the State of Delaware website. If you just put that in your Google, our website will come up, and you should pretty easily be able to find the post disposition unit on that website.
Okay, thank you very much.
And if you can't, reach out to me here, and I'll connect you with Eliza. My number is 577-5144.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Marge?
You mentioned that you were hoping, I'm not sure which, to get into some kind of immigration services or immigration law as well. I'm wondering what you're thinking about that. I serve on our Immigration Justice Committee, and we're constantly running into legal issues for non-documented immigrants. So what's your plan for that?
It's really a problem right now, more so like in Sussex County than in Newcastle County, but because there's a huge immigrant population down in Sussex County. We don't oftentimes have sufficient translator services in our office to even talk to people sometimes in a timely fashion. Right now, what we get from the state of Delaware is a bucket of money that we can use to deal with a fellow by the name of Rick Hogan. Rick Hogan's a local immigration lawyer. He's a terrific guy and a terrific lawyer. So oftentimes what we'll do is, I got this client and he's justice involved, but he's also got immigration issues, and he or she's going to lose maybe their, ability to stay in this country or the ability to even come back or what have you. We need to know what the implications are in this case. And we usually reach out to Rick. If we can grow this area a little bit, I would like to see us have a full-time immigration lawyer working with us that could handle these cases statewide, because we have that much business of people who are involved in the justice system who also may be undocumented or may be documented and may have some serious ramifications that will flow from either taking a guilty plea or going to trial and losing. But it should at least be part of the knowledge that we have to effectively represent them in the matter, what the implications are, what the collateral consequences are of getting a conviction. So stay tuned is the best thing I can say.
Okay.
Any other final questions? Well, if not, Kevin, I just want to say thank you so, so much for presenting and talking us with this evening. It was very, very informative, and I'm sure a lot of folks will be watching this recording after the fact. So I just want to say thank you. Before we close, I will say that next week there is no presentation. We've only missed a handful since we began these in the summer of 2020. But it will be in direct conflict with another event the church is hosting. I think they're encouraging folks, and we'll have a designated area for folks at the Delaware Art Museum next Thursday. So I hope many of you will be able to attend that instead, but we will not be having a class next week. And finally, I know Sue would be upset with me if I don't ask anyone who would like to be added to our distribution list to get regular updates about these Thursday programs. Please put your email in the chat. And I guess that may be in particular for you, James, if I don't want to presume whether you are here for this specific topic or if you are interested in joining us on a regular basis for these Thursday classes. But if interested, just please slip your email into the chat. And so with that, I'll say thank you very much and good night, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for
Bye.
having me.
Thank you so
very
much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Good night. See?